Hello, my name is Clive Billenness. I'm a lay member of the Synod of the Church of England's Diocese in Europe, which is the diocese's governing body. Until recently, I was a church warden for a Church of England chaplaincy. Chaplaincy is the word we use to describe a parish here in France. And I was in the Occitanie region of France. I was also a lay minister in our church. I've been a church warden in a number of different churches during my 60+ years as a member of the Church of England. I'm a qualified auditor, and until I retired, I was a senior research fellow at Brighton and Portsmouth universities. But now my focus is different, because while conducting some research into the medical consequences of bullying, I have discovered that some worship communities potentially have one or more mentally disordered people in their congregations who are setting out to disrupt and destroy their faith community in order to give themselves more power and influence. And I'm therefore making this film for the Leonidas Project to help you to consider this question: is there a psychopath in my parish? That sounds quite dramatic, doesn't it? That we may have one or more psychopaths loose among us. But if you can bear to stay with me for a few minutes, I'll share the evidence with you from a number of experts, tell you how to recognise if your faith community has come under attack, show you how you can spot a psychopath in your congregation if there is one, and what you can do about them to minimise the harm that they can cause. First of all, when you hear the word psychopath, don't start thinking about an image like this. Violent behaviour is not always a visible aspect of psychopathy. Violence can, however, manifest itself by social violence and bullying. And psychologists don't just talk about psychopaths anymore. They refer to people suffering from an antisocial personality disorder, since this better reflects the absence of physically violent behaviour in most psychopaths that one might encounter. The problem is that while psychopaths may not use actual violence to get their own way, they will often use bullying behaviour, and the effects of this can be far more dangerous to anyone that gets in their way. And it's not entirely their fault. Psychopaths have underdeveloped or malformed parts of their brain, which makes them how they are. In 2005, the American neuroscientist Dr. James Fallon was conducting research into Alzheimer's disease and was studying brain scans of psychopaths. However, he accidentally got his own brain scan mixed in with the samples and accidentally discovered that he had the same underdeveloped areas of the brain that his subjects did, and kindly published the scan of his brain. So here you see two brain scans. The top one is a normal brain scan, and the bottom one is Dr. Fallon's. As you can see, there are major differences in the particular part of the brain scan which I have circled in red. The area in Dr. Fallon's brain is less active. Now, this is because there are reduced connections between an area of the brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which controls sentiments such as empathy and guilt, and an area called the amygdala, which controls fear and anxiety. These reduced connections change a person's decision-making processes and create psychopathic behaviour. Psychopaths probably make up about 1% of the total world population, but around 25% of people in prison for serious crimes. So what are the characteristics of a psychopath? Psychopathic personalities show some of the following traits. Superficial charm. Psychopaths are often likeable on the surface. They're usually good conversationalists, and they share stories that make them look good. They may be funny and charismatic as well. They're often the life and the noisy soul of a party, but they can turn on you in an instant. Manipulative. Psychopaths are really good at getting other people to do what they want. They may play on one person's guilt or fluently tell lies in order to get someone else to do their work for them. Grandiose sense of self-worth. This is often referred to as narcissistic personality disorder. Psychopaths have an inflated view of themselves. They see themselves as important and entitled. They often feel justified to live according to their own rules, and they don't think that the rules that we follow apply to them. They will exhibit contempt for rules which they think they are too important to have to obey. And they will often push other people out of the way to advance themselves, and may even badger other people to give up positions of trust for which they feel they are more qualified. They also tend to disregard their own weaknesses. Lack of empathy. Psychopaths struggle to understand how someone else might have feelings and be afraid, sad, or anxious. It just doesn't make sense to them, as they're not able to read people. They can be completely indifferent to people who are suffering, even when it's a close friend or a member of their own family. Lack of remorse. Psychopaths are not concerned how their behaviour affects other people. They may not be worried about saying or doing something that hurts someone else, or they may insist that others are overreacting when their feelings are hurt. Ultimately, they don't experience any guilt for causing people pain. In fact, they often rationalise their behaviour, and they turn the blame on the people they are bullying, telling them that it's all their own fault. And psychopaths like to attach themselves to church congregations. In 2006, two psychologists, Drs. Paul Babiak and Robert Hare, wrote a book called Snakes in Suits, in which they showed how psychopaths manipulate those around them for their own gratification and advancement, and are therefore drawn to belong to groups which they can influence. Psychopaths are attracted to what are called affinity groups, religious, political, and social groups where the members hold common values and beliefs. The collective trust that members of these groups have in one another and their common belief system provides a perfect cover for the person with psychopathy. The psychopath has an ability to accurately mimic the group's beliefs or values while in the presence of its members. And as a result, trust is easily gained, and the true motives of the psychopath are less likely to be discovered. Religious groups in particular can be easy targets for manipulation because of shared qualities like acceptance of new members from a variety of backgrounds and lifestyles, the ability to forgive past wrongdoings, and a tendency to assume that those who join have similar beliefs and values. For many psychopaths, bullying is the key to power and influence. If they cannot influence someone, they'll resort to intimidation. Not necessarily by threatening people individually, but by trying to gather a group of supporters around them whom they can influence to jointly apply pressure. And the people in the group don't even realise that this is being done to them. Psychopaths like to hold positions of power where there is little or no accountability for their actions. And so being a group influencer is a role they fit very comfortably into. Psychopaths are masters of impression management and will work hard to elicit sympathy from those around them. It's very common to find that people who know psychopaths will divide into two groups. Those who speak highly of them because they see them as they appear from behind their mask, and those who dislike and distrust them intensely because they have seen them with their masks off. And because of these conflicting views, many people will be hesitant to believe anyone who tries to tell a story about an encounter with a psychopath with their masks off. Many psychopaths will present themselves as devoted Christians and will adopt the pose of being martyred by others for their beliefs. Psychopaths don't necessarily hold a formal position of leadership in the church, but they aspire to exert significant influence. They'll befriend people in power and become their closest friend and confidant. They will try to create a special relationship. They will always be there to support those in charge while whispering in their ear. But anyone in a position of power or influence who opposes them becomes an enemy. These people create havoc and divisiveness. They have their definite ideas about what should happen on a committee or in a church. And if they're unable to persuade others to follow their plan of how things should go, they'll create division and havoc that eventually will blow up that committee or even whole church. Psychopaths feel that they are above the rules, including the law. Church discipline means nothing to them. Using their impression of management skills, they may appear repentant, but real change never happens, or if it does, it's very short-lived. Often, psychopaths will blame others for their behaviour rather than taking responsibility for their own actions or poor decisions. They believe that the end justifies the means. They rarely learn from their mistakes or benefit from negative feedback, and they have difficulty inhibiting their impulses, which is where bullying comes in. If a psychopath can't get their own way by a charm offensive, they'll resort to bullying and try to compel people to comply with their demands, and they won't worry about what harm they cause along the way. Now, let's put this into a local church context and examine the 4 groups who can get drawn into a psychopath's power games. Firstly, there is the person or people who are targeted for attention by the psychopath or their followers. Usually, it is people in a leadership role. Vicars, lay leaders, or congregation leaders make juicy targets. Now, they're not necessarily weak individuals, although some targets can be vulnerable, sensitive people. Often they're strong, type A people, and amongst the most competent in the entire organisation. They're leaders who view their role as a career or a vocation and not just a job. These targets can be conscientious high achievers, but because of the environment in which they're working, which is traditionally non-confrontational, the targets may lack either the skills or the infrastructure to manage conflict management and may be reluctant to enter into a confrontation with those who start to bully them. And they're often not aware of the coordinated network of individual and organisational involvement attacking them. Closed groups within the church itself, such as self-appointed committees or even sometimes local Bible study groups, can provide an excellent cover for psychopaths. Sometimes this network comprises people who belong to another existing external network or social grouping. These might be members of a golf club or some other membership-based organisation in which they can securely coordinate their activities. The more closed the group is to outsiders, the better. Secondly, there's the psychopath themselves. It could be anybody in the church, but the red flag to watch for is someone who is trying to create a negative or misleading impression of their target by constantly dripping away at their professional competence or reputation. They will question the abilities of their targets and attempt to destroy public confidence in them. They'll make unfounded and unevidenced allegations against them and depend on their personal charm to get you to believe them. Often the allegations are very general. For example, I don't like their management style, or I don't like how they organise their work. And psychopaths will dream up hordes of anonymous supporters who agree with their opinion. Remarks such as, "Everyone knows that so-and-so did that," are something to watch out for. The danger is that before you know it, it's possible to be drawn into their web of lies and malice by not questioning the validity of what is being said. Which brings us to the members of the congregation who stand by and allow the psychopath to operate. And these are people who often form the silent majority who do not come forward to challenge the psychopath and so let them continue to play their games. But this is understandable because individuals fear that if they become involved, they'll be targeted as well. So better to stay quiet. And anyway, people who come to church didn't come to get involved in stuff like this, so it's easier to hide away than confront it and hope that the storm will pass them by. Or simply leave and find a different church. Theologically, this makes them the equivalent of the priest and the Levite who passed by the man lying at the side of the road in the parable of the Good Samaritan for fear of becoming involved. And finally, they may be compelled to confront the awful possibility that they have been fooled by a psychopath into becoming one of their accomplices. Admitting that you may have been deceived into bad behaviour or fooled by a psychopath is a hard thing to take on board. However, having watched this video, you might feel that you're now better informed than you were before, and so you're completely entitled to reevaluate your position. And finally, there's the church environment itself. One of the problems is the reluctance of church leaders to step in and confront bad behaviour. This is a universal problem because so few church leaders have any experience of dealing with this. They may well be fooled by the self-proclaimed management skills of the psychopath. They may also fear the level of fuss that a psychopath might appear capable of raising, and so disrupting the smooth running of the church. So, anything for a quiet life. One researcher has even suggested that the church officers might decide to harness the influencing skills of the psychopath to better control the rest of the congregation by eliminating opposition and dissenting voices. Also, these leaders might also be members of the same golf club or other organisation as the coordinators of the bullying, and so feel a sense of loyalty to them. Bullying can be fed by hostile communication patterns, for example, gossip or email criticism. And one of the favourite tools of the psychopath to create division is triangulation. Triangulation is where person A complains to person C through Z about person B, and hopes to turn these people against them without ever actually directly communicating with them. Triangulation can often be seen where an email criticising someone is copied to many other people, often people who have little or no direct involvement in the matter being complained about. I've personally seen an email accusing a member of clergy of theft, which was copied to everyone in the Church of England hierarchy, up to and including the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, this is an example of triangulation on a grand scale. Triangulation is a cunning tool because it's designed to make it difficult for the target to answer often vague criticisms about financial irregularities or poor leadership or poor time management, while leaving a generally negative impression of the person with people who are gullible enough to believe it. So, I started by saying that around all denominations of Christianity, parishes may be falling under the influence of one or more psychopaths. There is another group of individuals who might exhibit psychopathic tendencies quite blamelessly, and these are people who are suffering from Alzheimer's disease. People who suffer from Alzheimer's-induced psychopathy may show shallow emotions, a lack of empathy, a lack of remorse for their actions, and they may react aggressively when they're confronted about their behaviour. The ability of sufferers of dementia to identify what is moral is impaired and can lead to behaviour which appears psychopathic. In any community which contains a high percentage of older people, there is therefore an increased risk of psychopathic behaviour because of the onset of Alzheimer's disease. And now that I've described the typical characteristics and behaviours of psychopaths, I'm going to pause for a second and recommend you to buy a book, which has been a complete revelation to me about psychopathic and bullying behaviour in churches. And the book is called When Sheep Attack, and is written by Dennis Maynard. Or should I say, the Reverend Dr. Dennis Maynard, a priest in the Episcopal Church of the USA, the American sister church to the Church of England. And Dennis, by the way, is not paying me a commission to say this. Now, although Dennis has told me that his research has concluded that people who lead the attacks in churches are most often suffering from borderline personality disorder, or interesting, maybe active or recovering alcoholics, he refers to psychopaths as antagonists, and has offered this list of 7 signs that these people are at work in a parish. Look at the list and see if you can identify a psychopath in your congregation. And remember that there may be more than one. Dennis warns that antagonists have a habit of clustering, and that once a church gets a reputation for psychopathic behaviour, others may be attracted to that community, thereby making bullying part of the DNA and almost guaranteeing that it will be repeated. So, here are the warning signs that one or more psychopaths may be active in a church. Firstly, the sudden departure of one or more priests over a long period of time. Secondly, a decline in church attendance or giving following the priest's departure. Thirdly, people are discontinuing their engagement with the church or even setting up their own separate church. Fourth, church income levels overall, including fundraising, decline. Fifth, there are resignations of key officers and leaders within the church. Sixth, there are personal attacks on the priest and those who supported them. Danger, triangulation in use. And finally, a need for the senior officers of the church hierarchy to become involved in the running of the parish. So, is it possible to identify the psychopaths in your parish? Well, Dr. Liana Georgoulis, a Los Angeles psychologist, and lawyers Howard Aiken and Alberto Ayen have come up with these traits. Firstly, is there anyone you know who is capable of being charming 1 minute and switching it off the next? Secondly, is there anyone you know who is fond of criticising people for general failings and then claiming that lots of people have told them that they agree with them? Thirdly, is there anyone you know who tries to turn people against one another? Fourthly, is there anyone you know who intentionally causes chaos in an organisation? Fifthly, is there anyone you know who tends to make you doubt yourself and consider that you might be the person in the wrong? Sixth, is there anyone you know whose fault it never is when things go wrong, but who's always ready to loudly blame someone else? And seventh, is there anyone you know who has badgered someone in a position of trust to give it up and let them take over? And lastly, is there anyone you know who is prepared to say or do hurtful things to other people without any apparent remorse for the harm they may be causing? Now, if you can identify someone who has more than half of these traits, they are demonstrating psychopathic tendencies. And the next question you then have to ask yourself is, am I afraid to challenge their behaviour because I'm afraid that they and or their peer group will pick on me next? If this is the case, then you have silently already acknowledged to yourself that the person concerned is a psychopath, and you've allowed yourself to be recruited into their support group. So what can you do about it if you now believe there is a psychopath manipulating your organisation? Firstly, never confront a psychopath. You will always end up coming out worse because the psychopath will have no compunction in coming after you and making you their next target and calling in their supporters. In some churches, you can witness how the wave of attacks moves from one person to the next. But there are things you can do to protect yourself and your fellow parishioners from psychopaths. If you can, put some distance between yourself and the psychopath. Be too busy to come to their socials or explain you have other commitments. Don't invite them to your social gatherings if you can avoid it. Try to avoid them giving even tacit support by nodding sympathetically as they spin a web of lies or malicious rumours. Outlaw triangulation. Refuse to acknowledge, validate or repeat any allegations made to you about someone else. Some churches have an anti-triangulation covenant which is signed by every church council member. Watch closely for the people who object to introducing one of these. They're highly likely to be a member of the psychopath support group. After all, why would any Christian organisation wish to condone rumour-mongering and malicious gossip? Next, start asking questions when a psychopath tries to gain your support by making allegations against a third party. Ask for details. Ask who, when, why, how. And never promise to keep these things between ourselves. And start putting the accusations you hear to the person about whom they are made. You're not under any obligation of confidentiality to not inform the person. And it's better they hear these from you with an assurance that you don't accept them as true than from somebody else. If a psychopath stands for election for any kind of office of authority, stand against them. Psychopaths are narcissistic and hate losing. A few setbacks may send them scuttling away. And if they claim that they're only doing a job because nobody else will do it, offer publicly to take it off of them to relieve their burden and see what happens. Insist on secret votes on anything important in your church's life. You may be surprised how many other people have watched this video and so will be on the alert for the presence of a psychopath. People who oppose secret ballots are those who hope to intimidate you into voting for or against something by making you identifiable. Sadly, in the Church of England, parishes, secret ballots are not automatic, nor is postal voting for the election of officers. This has to be specifically adopted by an annual meeting. And this actually allows psychopaths to flourish by preventing or intimidating people away from attending meetings where decisions are being taken. But if you can get a secret ballot, don't vote for a psychopath, however charming they're being today. If you can see whom the psychopath is targeting, make contact with those people and express your support and your love for them. Being the target of a psychopathic bully is a terrible and lonely place. There are many research papers about the destructive effect of being targeted. People in this position regularly consider committing suicide, so knowing that they are not alone is a powerful force for good. And finally, pray for the psychopath. Pray for them to be healed. In the Bible, Saul demonstrated many of the signs of psychopathy, and yet he was healed by Jesus and became Paul, one of the greatest disciples of Christ. But never forget, you can pray for a hungry lion, but you should still climb the tree to stop it from eating you, and also to protect your flock from its ravenous jaws. And now, a final thought and warning. Are you the psychopath in your parish? Well, it could happen, but if you watch this all the way through and have found it emotionally very hard, then the probability is that you aren't. However, there is a workbook which accompanies this video, which includes details of a medically validated self-test that you can take to assess your level of psychopathic tendencies. And I assure you that I took the test before starting out on this project, just to be sure about myself as well. But if you are the psychopath, watch out. I've just given away all your little secrets, so why don't you move on and try your luck somewhere else? Or better still, go and get some help. And if you aren't the psychopath, don't now say that I didn't warn you about them, and always be on the lookout for their tactics.